Hi guys, it's Erin. So I wasn't gonna do this video because I didn't want to, and then I filmed my 2019 goals video, which might end up being a rough draft. Actually, I do that sometimes. I film a video and then I don't like how I said what I said, but it helped me clarify my thoughts, so I refilm. We'll see what happens. Anyway, digression. In the middle of that video, I did suddenly started listing out a bunch of books that I was excited to get to this year, and I realized that instead of burying it in the middle of something else, I should probably just let it be its own thing. So these are the 19 books that I'm excited to read in 2019. The reason I didn't really want to film this video was because I am such a mood reader that I feel like I already kind of have enough lists. And so with that said, this is no guarantee that I'm going to read any of the books on this list necessarily. These are just ones that at the very end of 2018 I'm kind of would like to have a chance to get to in the near future, maybe in the next year, we'll see. Also, I'm in a huge fantasy mood at the moment, and that will probably change. So again, is this list accurate? I don't know, but these are some books that I want to read. There are a few new 2019 releases on the list, but most of it is backlist or even classics, although I've kept the classics light because I feel like my kind of classics challenges sort of fill in that gap. Like, those are the 13 or 14 classics that I'm excited to get to, so I'll link the last two videos about my George Eliot reading and about just my general classics reading somewhere if you want to go look for them. And with all of that as an introduction, here are my 19 books. I'm not going to say a ton about each because I don't want this video to be a bajillion years long, and also I don't know a ton about most of these. Okay, so two new releases that I'm really excited about. First, in 2019, at the end of the year, is Erin Morgenstern's new book. I think it's called The Starless Sea. I don't know anything about this, but I love The Night Circus. It's one of my all-time favorite books. I reread it frequently, and I'm just super excited that Erin Morgenstern has finally released a new book. It's been like 10 years or something, so it's very exciting. The other book that I'm excited about is The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This book is humongous, so not sure if I'll actually read it, but I would like to get it at least. And I'm not sure when this one is coming out. Sooner, I think. Samantha Shannon wrote The Bone Season, and it's two of its many sequels. And I read The Bone Season this year, and I thought it was just a really, really well done kind of fantasy sci-fi book. And The Priory of the Orange Tree is like hardcore fantasy. There are dragons in it, and I don't know a whole lot about it, but some other writers that I really like and some other people who have gotten arcs have been really excited about it, and so I think it will be really interesting. And since I'm in such a fantasy mood, that's really cool. Also, The Bone Season was Samantha Shannon's debut, and it does not read like a debut, so we have good hopes for her fourth or fifth novel. There are quite a few series that I started that I want to finish eventually soon. I kind of have a running list on my phone of various books that I'd like to try to read or get to, but I didn't want to throw all of them on the list just because, again, I don't really know. But the one that I really want to make a priority next year is Laini Taylor's Dreams of Gods and Monsters. This is the third book in the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy, and I was afraid of finishing it because I didn't want it to be horrible and depressing. And now that I've finished the Strange the Dreamer duology, I know that it probably won't be, and so I'm eager to kind of finish the series. Also, this book, I didn't realize how glossy it was. That's so pretty. These are the UK paperback editions. I really dislike the US covers. I feel like these evoke the atmosphere of the book a lot better. I feel like I need to talk about at least a couple of classics that I am particularly looking forward to getting a hold of, and one of them is George Eliot's The Mill on the Floss. I don't know a whole lot about this, but aside from Middlemarch, this is the one that I've heard the most about, and so I'm really looking forward to getting to it. I'm about halfway through Adam Bede, which is the one she wrote before before this, and so once I've finished Adam Bede, I can start this, and I'm super excited. In like October or something, I was at a retreat, and Wendell Berry's name came up a lot, and I got a collection of his poetry called Given, and I'm not even finished reading it because I read through poetry collections kind of casually, and I just love his writing. It's beautiful. And he also wrote a series of novels, and when I asked some people like which one I should start with, they suggested Hannah Coulter because it's shorter. And it is indeed short. It's much shorter than I thought, although this is kind of a tall book. This is sort of like a standard US paperback, and you can see it's a little bit, it's like an inch taller. Digressions! But Wendell Berry's stories are all set in the same town, and he does this cool thing, apparently, I don't know because I haven't read any of them, but apparently kind of his main characters in the book that's about them show up as minor characters in other stories, and so you get to meet some of the people in the town and then go and read about them in a story where they are the protagonist. So they are all set in this town called Port William in Kentucky. It's a really rural, small town kind of feel, and I'm just really looking forward to having a couple of books. There's some more in this list that are kind of contemporary or maybe like slightly historical, but just like comfort books that are thick and rich and squidgy and happy. Hannah Coulter is about this woman named Hannah Coulter, and she's older and in her 70s, and she's kind of like looking back on her life and reflecting on it. Going along with that kind of like contemporary but thoughtful, not like fluffy contemporary or hard-hitting contemporary. Like, I'm not in the mood for either one of those things at the moment, but these kind of like reflective contemporaries or something, I don't know, is Pilgrim's Inn by Elizabeth Gouge. This is a terrible cover. I hate this cover so much. I actually put off buying this book for months because I hate this cover, but it was easier to get the paperback than to dig around for a like first edition, so here we are. Somebody please redesign this. It's so bad. It makes it look like a Christian women's fiction Amish historical romance thing. That is not what it is. This is set in England. Elizabeth Gouge was an English writer. It's set after the war, so I'm not sure if it's World War I or World War II. He's wearing a uniform. This is book 2 in a series about this family called the Elliot family, and apparently one of the characters owns this inn called Pilgrim's Inn, and it's just about the people that come there who are all kind of like searching for something or who need to kind of have some kind of change in their lives, and how like the community and the place and stuff help them do that. So I'm explaining it badly, but it's not a like weird, it's not what the book says. Don't judge a book by its cover. Keeping with the more classic literary strain that we're in right now, another book that I'm really excited to read is the poetry of George Herbert. I'm actually reading this for school. This is the only book in the list that's from my school reading, and that's only because I don't actually know what any of the rest of it's going to be. But I love George Herbert. I just finished this little book, 100 Poems, and Herbert wrote vastly more than 100 poems, and I don't know how many of his poems we will actually read in the class, but we're getting the collected works to read from, so at the very least I will have all of them, and that's really exciting. So I'm really looking forward to that. I love the poetry of George Herbert. He wrote in the 1600s, and his poetry is kind of dense and a little complicated, but really worth sitting with and kind of unwinding, because once you do, it's really beautiful and profound. Another book that I'd really like to get to next year is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I read Circe this year, and it was so good, and I would just like to read The Song of Achilles. It's one that I've actually eyed before, but just kind of never picked up, and now that I know how wonderful her writing is, I would really like to read it. It's kind of a story about Achilles, who's the hero of the Iliad, and that's all I know, but I really want to read it. I don't have it. I'll probably get it from the library. Another kind of small town, heartwarming contemporary is this book by Leaf Anger called Virgil Wander. Again, I've been hearing really good things about this. This is about a man named Virgil Wander who's in an accident and has memory problems as a result, and is kind of just like re-piecing together his life, and he lives in this small town in Iowa or something, the Midwest. I don't actually know where. And so I love this cover. It's so beautiful, all the stars. Two nonfiction books that I'm really looking forward to getting to this year. The first one is Paul in Fresh Perspective by N.T. Wright. This is from my school library, and so it doesn't have the dust jacket. N.T. Wright is a New Testament theologian and historian, and Paul is one of his kind of special subjects. He's spent a lot of time studying and writing about Paul. This book is actually from 2005, and he's written quite a few other things. Jeez, just hit my face. Since then, including a book that came out last year, which is a biography of St. Paul. This book is the kind of book form of the Halcyon Lectures from Cambridge University, which he gave sometime before this. And they're just kind of like, it's what the book says. It's kind of, what do we know about Paul now in 2005, and what do we know about the things that he wrote that might be different from sort of what has been maybe erroneously assumed or taught about him. I read last year for school a book by a French philosopher that was looking at St. Paul, and I realized how little I actually know about him, even though he's an important figure just kind of in history, not to mention kind of theologically. And so I'd like to kind of start to learn more about him, and this is a nicely manageable beginning. The other book is not manageable. It's this one, These Truths by Jill Lepore. This is a history of the United States, and it's a civic history, so it focuses more on the ideas of the United States than the actual events. So for example, Lepore spends a lot of time talking about the ideas that led to the American Revolution, and then spends like 4 seconds on the actual revolution. So she's definitely assuming that you know the kind of major events and figures, George Washington, James Madison, whoever, and honestly, if you don't know them, like, Google is useful for those kinds of things, but she is examining the ideas, which are a little bit harder to kind of like just Google and figure out. I have actually begun this. I'm 164 pages into it. It's about 750 pages. There's a ton of notes at the back, so it's not as long even as it looks, but super, super interesting. I really appreciate that she has shown a very balanced perspective. Jill Lepore is a Harvard history professor, and she writes for The New Yorker, and it's a very intelligent but also accessible book. And the way it's written, it's kind of in chunks, so that even each chapter is sort of broken down into sections, and you can read kind of one section and then come back and pick up the thread. So I've been reading it sort of slowly off and on, and I'll continue to do that until it's over. Everything else on the list is fantasy, so here we go. Like I said, I'm in such a big fantasy mood, and I'm really interested to explore some authors that I've heard recommended to me, or ones that I've been wanting to get to for a while and just haven't, because I've been reading things that I don't really genuinely care about. So I think these are going to be really interesting, and I hope that I can continue with this sort of fantasy train this year. I would sort of like it to be the year of fantasy. The first book that I'm super excited about is The Summer Tree by Guy Gavriel Kay. This is the first book in the Finnevar Tapestry, and I sort of stumbled on this in some kind of list or something. But Guy Gavriel Kay has written a ton of fantasy, and apparently he's really good. I don't know much about this except that it's a portal fantasy about some university students, and also Guy Gavriel Kay worked with Christopher Tolkien to help him write the Silmarillion when he was trying to do that, so Tolkien connection is a win in my book. Apparently this is kind of a story in the tradition of Tolkien, but not one of those that's like basically a rewrite, a bad rewrite. Another fantasy I'm excited to get to is Lyriel by Garth Nix. I get Guy Gavriel Kay and Garth Nix mixed up all the time, but Garth Nix has also written quite a lot of fantasy. So a lot of people categorize this as a young adult, but it's not actually. This is the sequel to Sabriel, and I read that just a couple of months ago, and I really, really liked it. It's just a good old style fantasy. The world and the magic system were really interesting and well developed, and the story was really good and just one of those classic good and evil stories. I really liked Sabriel, the main character. Yeah, I just really enjoyed it, and so I'd like to continue. I also have the third book in the trilogy too, so if I can, I'd like to get to both of them. Speaking of Tolkien, The Fall of Gondolin came out this past September, I think, and I bought the copy right away and then never had time to get to it. So I'd like to read that sometime next year when I'm sort of feeling in a Tolkien mood. I've already read the story. This is like Beren and Luthien. It's a collection of Tolkien's different versions of the story with some kind of light commentary by Christopher Tolkien. And this is, I think, the last book that Christopher Tolkien is going to edit of his father's works, which is kind of sad, but and it's the third in the trilogy of the great stories. I don't remember what the book is called. The Children of Hurin, and then Beren and Luthien, and then The Fall of Gondolin were kind of, for Tolkien, the like three major stories of Middle-earth. And he never wrote a complete finished version of any of them, so I think The Fall of the Children of Hurin was the most complete, so that one was actually like Christopher kind of turned it into just one story, but these two are just a collection of all of the different versions, and I've actually read most of the different versions of the story already because they're in the histories of Middle-earth, but they're spread across a bunch of books, so here they all are together. I really enjoyed reading Beren and Luthien and seeing how the story kind of shifted and changed over time, and so I'm excited to do that with this one also. One of these books is not a fantasy, it's historical fiction, but there's a fine line between historical fiction and fantasy sometimes. The book that I'm interested in getting to is The Drowned King. I can't ever remember the author's name, and I didn't write it down because I'm dumb like that, but I'll put it on the screen. This is a story that's kind of like Vikings, and it just sounded really interesting, and I've been meaning to read it, so as soon as I have the chance, I will definitely do that. Historical fiction is another genre that I kind of want to revisit next year, even though I am doing a bad job of including it in this list. Alright, 3 more books. First is The Bear and the Serpent by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I got this from the library. This is the UK cover, randomly. I'm not sure why they ended up with this one, but it's very nice. And this is the sequel to The Tiger and the Wolf. This is a trilogy, I think. So this is the middle book, and I don't actually know what happens in this one, but I really liked The Tiger and the Wolf. It's a fantasy series that about shapeshifters, and there's this very interesting culture. It feels kind of like it's set in the Americas, like pre-Columbus, but really, really well done. Really fascinating world, really interesting story, and kind of not your typical fantasy. And The Bear and the Serpent is a sequel, so I would like to continue. First is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. I bought this a while ago, and again, started it, but just have not had time to dedicate to it. And I would like to do that. So, I've been hearing really great things about Brandon Sanderson as a fantasy writer and about Mistborn as a series in general, and I feel like I need to read it. And then the last one is Patrick Rothfuss's The Name of the Wind. Again, I've been hearing great things about this. I've had this book for quite a while. I know the series isn't finished and people are despairing and waiting for the end, but I don't actually mind doing that. So if I really, really like this one, I might move on to Wise Man's Fear, which is the second book in the trilogy, or I might just wait for a while. I don't really know. And the last book that I'm excited about, I don't actually know what it is. But Maggie Stiefvater has been writing things that she has not been telling us about very in detail, except that they're things that she is writing, and she has promised that she will have some release dates for her books that are coming out in 2019 soon. So I don't actually know what is coming out. I'm assuming the first book in the Ronin trilogy, but I don't actually know, and I don't have a cover to show you. But whatever she publishes next year, I will read, because everything she writes is wonderful. And so that is the last book that I'm really excited to get to. So that's my list, 19 books. That was actually kind of a hard list to compile. I had to think about it a little bit, because like I said, I'm a mood reader. I'd love to hear in the comments some of the books that you're excited about reading next year. I cannot believe this year is basically over. It's crazy. Thanks for watching. Happy New Year, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.